Um, Thank you all again for being with us today. This is such an energizing day after an energizing few days, an energizing few weeks installing the show. So again, my gratitude to everyone for being here. The last panel, fierce scholars and practitioners and artists, and setting the tone for the conversation that we will have for the latter part of the day, and picking up some notes from the first panel that I think are really prescient for the ways that the artists in the show all sitting here, which is amazing. Just shout out, yay! One round for now. I'm in awe of the folks that are on the stage with me, and so truly humbled and honored that they trusted me with their work and that they're still rocking with me for the rest, at least until the end of December, if not longer. The first question I have for the panel is thinking about this exhibition started with a particular an invitation from Will, who's to my left here, William Villalongo, who was starting to work, or in the middle of working on with Shraddha, the portfolio that is on view in the exhibition, and became the anchor for the show. And hello, it's so bright. Can y'all see? Yeah, it's a little crazy, but anyway, became the anchor for the show, and we didn't know what we were doing. He was like, hey, Judy's at the Print Center is interested in helping us figure this out, super supportive, but I don't really know what this is. I know that I'm making work, and I know that I'm with Shraddha remaking the Du Bois's data portraits, but I don't know what that could be for a show. Would you want to curate? They're asking if I have guest curator ideas, and I was like, sure. I was like, but what exactly? What? William was like, I don't know. Was like, I'll set up a Zoom call, and when we got on that Zoom call, I was totally thinking that Will was going to be like, yeah, so, and throwing ideas back and forth, and it was just me talking. And he was just in the background, on the Zoom, and he was like, and I was like, okay. I was like, I don't even know what just happened. What is going on? And then it became this really beautiful expanded group exhibition that's thinking about the history of printmaking because of its situatedness at the Print Center, but also highlighting the Print Center's the end of the 25th anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Print Center, and its own kind of forward thinking of itself as an institution, what printmaking is in the 21st century, how Du Bois modeled different methods for how to engage with print and data and technology 125 years ago that are still very relevant and necessary today, and how artists of African descent, all here on this panel, were thinking about Du Bois either in their own practices or they are orbiting around Du Bois, or directly engaging with his legacy through the reproduction of these data portraits for Will and Shraddha. So the first question I have is about Du Bois as a spur, and maybe a North Star or some kind of influence for you. What is your own relationship to Du Bois? We'll start with Silas.
I feel like the Du Bois as spur, I feel like that came up in a studio visit when we were talking about the show. And for me, Du Bois as a spur is I come to him as an accidental design historian. Du Bois gagged me in the middle of a project that I was working on, or I guess towards the end of a project for Mark Bradford, the painter. Brian Johnson, my business partner, and I were designing his catalog for the 2017 Venice Biennale, and Katie, who is one of the curators on the show, in the book, Mark asked to use a fragment of Black Reconstruction as a text, because he was sort of dealing with some of the things the previous panel was talking about, sort of crisis in society and sort of his role as an artist of kind of dealing with histories of Black destruction and reconstruction. And Katie was like, hey, there were these data visualizations that were recently digitized by Du Bois, should we put one of them in this book? And I had never seen them before, and I'm like, what? Data visual, and it kind of, my wig was flipped. And then I think literally 6 months after that, Whitney Battle-Baptiste, who's here, and Britt Russert, sent me an email. They're like, hey, would you like to write about the graphic design of these diagrams? And and write an essay. And I was like, yes, please. And like, just that kind of entering that and trying to find a voice for that was like a thing that shifted my whole world. And what ended up happening was there was a short text about the fabrication and the production of the plates and how he did it in collaboration, as people like discussed already, including William Addison Rogers, one of his students who kind of became the point person of the production, and many women and men of color. Like, and for me, the way it happened was, I guess, fragments. I got to write captions, and I feel like that Du Bois is so many fragments and so many pieces and parts, and so I feel like that's like seen across the bodies of work here. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
Kameelah, do you want to respond? I mean, because when we first started talking about this project, I was like, oh, and I was just like pitching. I just was like calling up people, pitching them and being like, would you want to work with me on this? And Kameelah was like, oh my God, yes, a casual mathematics. I've already been thinking about Du Bois, although not naming it, but like, yes, so I was maybe looking at you.
Thanks,
So
Tiffany. Yeah, I think that, I think there are maybe several starting points. I think maybe I'll go autobiographical first, which is that I've always struggled with math, or I assumed that I struggled with math. And then I got to geometry in 10th grade, and I was like, oh, shapes and proofs and some design element, and something sort of opened up for me. And I started getting really interested in like diagrams and scientific sort of like schematics. And so around 2018, I was working on this series called A Casual Mathematics, which in a lot of ways was sort of taking sort of mathematical diagrams and mathematical equations and sort of playing with the question of what can and cannot be measured, what can and cannot be equated, and sort of taking an equation that included numbers and sort of replacing numbers or replacing the perimeter of something with poetic language. So I was sort of interested in like what a diagram can do or what an equation can do, but also what could sort of break an equation or what could sort of break the logic of like math, which in a lot of ways felt very quick and decisive, and I was interested in sort of thinking about questions of Black liberation that were not quick and decisive, but actually needed to labor a bit. And so one of the first pieces I made was like 1 + 1 = 2, which like, yeah. And then beneath it was like, but that's a lazy equation. And so I started thinking about lazy equations or sort of like lazy approaches to counting or sort of like quantifying things. And I think at the time I was reading a lot of Catherine McKittrick as well, and sort of the way that she was thinking about data and citation and mathematics, but being really, really interested in who gets counted, who doesn't get counted, and what happens when we sort of rely on lazy equations. Like, if we do this, then this will be the result. And me being very interested and also annoyed with the desire for efficiency over sort of like nuance. And so I think about equations as this like effort at efficiency. And so I had a show in Miami in 2019, and I had some of this work up, and this man walks up to me, and he was like, do you know W.E.B. Du Bois? And I looked at him, and I had to pause because my mother taught me to be respectful, because I was like, yeah, you know, that guy. So he's describing Du Bois to me, and he's describing his visualizations. He was like, this is so interesting because it feels like you guys are in conversation. And sure, I didn't like the premise of that conversation or sort of the start of it, but I think there was sort of a bridge in thinking about someone who was counting and enumerating and trying to measure, and then me on the other side being like, what can and cannot be measured, or what like happens when things sort of fall out of an equation. So making works where things sort of fall out of the frame or fall out of the equation or sort of like fall into the ground, but they never sort of like settle in the frame. And I'll say more later about compression, but I think there's something there about Du Bois's work in the way that data visualizations function as these compressions in a lot of ways, and they're very portable compressions. And my interest in sort of like decompression, and so like how an installation can expand an individual data visualization to a constellation and then can be packed up again and recompressed. So I think there's some sort of dynamics with compression and decompression.
I love that laziness. Josh also was telling us about laziness earlier, so I'm like, oh, this is a word that's been coming up for us. Will and Shraddha.
Hello. I'm trying to think where I should start. With Du Bois, I mean, I think it really started here as a student. You know, I'm a, you know, ever 19 or something like that in late 1990s. in a school that, which I would say most of my classmates were predominantly white, and let's just say that humanities apparatus had not kind of like even come close to the time. So like, I could go on and on, but what I found, what I needed to do in this space was I needed to find my narratives, and they weren't here. And I think so. I went on a kind of personal mission, which is also like to say, I reached out to other Black people as well in the space. But I came across Souls of Black Folk maybe previously, like as a kind of like something in high school. Somebody said something, but I read it here, and this is in the middle of talking about learning about modernism. Ideas like existentialism. And so it became so important to me to find these ways in which I could talk about, the work that I was doing, which was focused, in Black culture, how I could have conversations about what I was doing, right, in a space in which there didn't seem to be like a kind of groundwork for that. So, learning about double consciousness, right, for me was an answer to like existentialism. So when I'm putting some work on the wall and people want to talk about like, existentialism and things like this, and not seeing that, right, in my work, I needed to find a language, right, to like say, well, this is what's going on here. So it's just an extension of these, these other ideas. So that really is what brought me to Du Bois, and that kind of idea of double consciousness has kind of been a kind of framework for me in terms of thinking about how to be an artist, how to make work that is, and how to kind of get to a sort of complexity of the notion of identity, especially in Black identity.
Sure. Hello? Yeah. So my introduction to Du Bois, I would say, came in three parts. One, I was born and raised in New York City, and in the 80s, for some reason, Black history, amongst me and my peers, Black history was cool, and reading was cool, and Dr. Ben and all of these historians that studied Egypt, and there used to be meetings in City College. I think it was called First World, and all of these scholars used to come in. We used to go on Friday evening to lectures, right? So I knew Souls of Black Folks was an important text. So I purchased it, skimmed through it. I was a teenager. I did not read it when I was a teenager, right? And then fast forward to college. I graduated from Morehouse College, which is in the Atlanta University Center. It's coalition of a number of schools: Spelman College, Morehouse College, Morehouse School of Medicine, Morris Brown, and Atlanta University. So I was in these buildings with that so many scholars, Black scholars, foundational scholars walked. Same steps, same buildings, same pathways, same church halls. And I guess the third introduction was through the book. And I saw, the third introduction was through the data visualizations. And also in the book, I'm looking at images of these folks, these scholars, in the buildings that I visited when I was in school. So the third introduction was through the data viz. And when I saw these, it was 2018, 17, something like that, 2016. 2018, I was education chair at the Library of Congress. And I tried really hard to see them face to face, but it was a bit difficult. But when I saw them, saw reproductions of them, I was like, oh, because I'm doing data viz myself, but I was like, oh, this is already done. Like, what am I doing? Like, he already did this, in 1896, 6, 7. Like what are we doing? Like, and also how can we advance what he's done? Yeah, so that's my introduction.
I think for me, my introduction to Du Bois was also in probably like middle school, high school. I went to a majority all-black high school in a majority black city, had a lot of black educators, so I always knew like Du Bois was somebody super important. I would say when I was younger, early on, there was discussions, folks trying to divide themselves into camps of Booker T. Washington versus Du Bois, and my family is from Alabama, so I was always familiar with Tuskegee. And so just early on, I knew that was a thing that was important. And I, read Souls of Black folks really young, probably obviously before I could fully understand it. So I would say, I think I grew up knowing that Du Bois was significant. I would say more recently, I think I'm learning just how sometimes history is taught in a very finite way, and then understanding that, actually, there's so much that you don't know. There's so much that we're continuing to know, and it's like, people have been doing very deep study around these scholars and putting things into context, and so I always like, I'm not gonna lie, I do like the historical tea. I do like to be like, come for the mess, stay for the message, as people like to say.
Hashtag.
But one of the things I will say, and then obviously, I didn't think it was gonna be in thirds, but I do love thirds. This project really opened my eyes to a lot more of Du Bois, and I was trying to read as much as I could get my hands on, and so 2 additional texts that really helped me to just be more curious about Du Bois. I recently read Josh's book of Black Study, and that was very, very helpful. And then I was watching, I did not know Africana existed in the world until I just was watching Black News, the experimental film by
Khalil Joseph.
Thank you. I'm always messing up names. And when I saw it in the film, I was like, I ordered it right away. I was like, it's all these copies of this out in the world and for relatively cheap. So that was very helpful in helping me too. But I think Dr. Christina Jackson had mentioned about like using everything that you have. And when I look at someone, like I see that like building your own table, not seeking permission, being comfortable with also getting up from certain tables when it no longer aligns with your principles or your practice. And so I feel really inspired by Du Bois in this particular moment in relationship to that.
Can I add on to that? There was a citation I wanted to like drop in that was really important in my own research, which was Mabel O. Wilson's Negro Building. And just to hear what you were saying about being in the footsteps. I feel like that is such a experience I'm having in this show, and like in the whole arc of Du Bois, of his footsteps, and like as was very illustrated in the previous panel, like the collectives and the connective tissue of collectives, and how powerful that is and how liberating that is, and like just the citational practice of like honoring our ancestors. And I feel like that has been a big part of the work that I made in this show. And just like there's so much ancestorship and community like on this stage and like in this space.
Yeah. I was going to say, Shraddha, this is a perfect segue to you, because I wanted to add on to that and think about collectivity and how you all are making in collective or collaboration. And this is a perfect segue to you, Shraddha. So.
Yeah, so I, unlike all these artists on the stage, my background is in urban planning, and I was interested in the ways that data is used in urban planning, often as a way of power, as a tool of power, data is very expensive, data is, scarce, and it's hard to get your hands on and know what to do with it. And it's the people with the tools and the access can use it in, in ways to, to their benefit. And I was curious about how, we can kind of flip that and put data in the hands of communities and use data to benefit communities. And the work that Du Bois did in Philadelphia and the ways that, he went out into the communities and gathered data to make things visible that were not otherwise collected or known. And that kind of led me to the book that Whitney Battle-Baptiste and Silas and Mabel Wilson all contributed to, and Will and I were, sitting around the coffee table with this book on, in front of us during the pandemic, and we were thinking, in that moment about like how, what we could do, and we were looking at this book, and we thought that, I have the data skills, and Will has like the artist and visual skills, and that's kind of what brought us to this collective and this project.
Can Tahir and Silas also talk a little bit about the collectivity piece, since you brought it up, Silas, but also Tahir, you are typically, well, as I understand your practice, you're also sometimes working in teams. Mm-hmm. And so how does that inflect your practice? I know that you're being presented as a single artist in the show, but there's actually tons of, like a whole network and community of researchers behind you that's also inflecting your work.
Yeah, especially with work dealing with technology. And it's interesting being an artist working in technology, especially about authorship, because in the beginning, I did most of the work myself, most of the coding, most of the work myself. But then I realized, and it was fine. It was because I was doing smaller projects. I was making posters, and I would post my posters on my blog, and then I was doing analyses of rappers' lyrics of songs, and I would draw a silhouette, and I would post it. And then I had one comment, and it was like, "This rap blog sucks," right? It was like, if you want a real rap blog, you would do like Lupe Fiasco's whole album, and you would do this. And I was like, wait a minute, that's a really good suggestion. So I took a break, and then worked with a developer friend of mine, Ted. I explained to him what my idea was. I gave him a taxonomy. I gave him like a sample data set, and told him I wanted to analyze all of these. I wanted to analyze this corpus for semantic and syntax value. And yeah, we worked for like a few months. We had a functional prototype, and it's in that way of, with this kind of work, I could lead with ego and do it myself, and then I'll have one project every 3 years, or you can build with the team and be able to iterate quicker and publish more work.
Yeah, I think teams are really important. I always try to acknowledge that. I feel like my practice is very hybrid in different ways, like as a historian, as a graphic designer, as an artist, and Polymode, the studio that I helped create, they're such an influence on me, and it's such a collective effort. I feel like design especially, art also. So I want to acknowledge that. And also I feel like as a teacher, my students also influence me. And so actually there's a fair amount of crossover between people who have been my students and people who work at Polymode. So Edgar Casadin helped me animate the 2-channel video, and Sandia Anthony, he took a poetic research course, helped me make the wall drawing, and also the textile. So I think this acknowledgement of a collective authorship, I think, is so important and so key. And I like what you're saying to hear. It's a trusting others, and also to trust, like you can kind of focus on your strengths, right? And then you become stronger and you can kind of like let go of control. I imagine it's the same thing with the printing, with Will and Shraddha, and like that idea of like, yeah, like the collective, like the metaphor of water, right? Like, and how it like raises all boats, I feel like is so important. And I feel like that also like the process of making artwork, I think is like a learning endeavor. I feel like even all the works in the show like are just like prototypes for like the next thing too. So I feel like that's also a way that I feel like I work, and also I think helps with perfectionism and like being able to, that was a lot of the discussion about Du Bois like learning in public and him putting out things because it was so urgent, like I need to put this thing out. And I feel like that's a huge part of my practice.
Yeah, I want to stick with this question of iteration too. I think this is really important to both Kameelah and to Julia, and I wanted to hear you all talk a little bit about how you think about iteration in your own practices. You know, that could be a broad response, but iteration, especially in terms of the matrix and like thinking about printmaking, and the kind of expanded approach to printmaking that I have kind of organized the show around, that it's not simply traditional works on paper that come from a matrix or a screen print or something like that, but that is also thinking about printmaking as an expanded medium that also has to deal with matrices and analog and algorithmic technologies and techniques and iteration.
Looked at me, so I have to say. I think that given the last panel and what was just said, I was thinking about collaboration in different registers. So I think there's collaboration, of course, between different people, different species, different organizations, but I also think there's an element of collaboration with former versions of yourself. And that's what I think revision actually is. It's sort of like a very Black vernacular call and response where you're calling and responding to these different versions of yourself. And so I think one of the hardest things in my practice has been having started off as a person who was like, I'm just not done. Like in the Lucille Clifton spirit, I'm not done yet. And having collectors or institutions being like, you need to finish this, close it off, frame it, seal it, it's done, put it on the wall and move. And me sort of like fighting this and me being just like a fussy child, but also sort of sticking with that because I think there's something intuitively for me in understanding that when you make a thing, you're making a thing, but that your relationship to that thing will change over time. And so there is an element of openness that has to be there if you are to like grow with the work and if you are interested in some sort of like revision as like a poetics. And I think Dionne Brand has this interview that she did in 2018. It was for the Blue Clerk, where she talks about poetry being pressure on the page, which I think is like one element that I found really beautiful. But she also talks about her practice being diacritical. And diacritics in the sense of like in Arabic, like you have like a diacritic above a letter that is gives it its vowel, but it also in Arabic it's a harakat, which means it moves the word, it gives motion to the word, right? And so I think this idea of having a diacritical practice is really interesting. This idea that you can make a thing and then you can go back and accent it or inflect it differently or add another notation. And so I think in a lot of ways, I've been thinking a lot about my dad as he's like getting older, but like looking at his archive and recognizing to the extent to which he's influenced my practice. When he converted to Islam early in the 80s, he would have these binders of notes that he would just like keep taking notes. They look like almost like core samples or a palimpsest. It's just like him stacking cutouts of things. It's quite interesting to look at, and I didn't know that it influenced my work until someone told me, because it was just sort of unconscious for me. But I mention this because I think in a lot of ways the sort of practice of like redaction or annotation or marginalia is really fascinating to me, because I kind of think that they end up being the like second cast characters or the secondary characters, but I think I'm interested in like thinking about revision and annotations and marginalia as like protagonists in the practice. And so one of the works in the show, oh, it's right there. That one, whoa, that was perfect timing. That work, it just passed. That work in the show was originally created in 2019, and so a lot of my works will be noted as like 2019 through a certain number of years, because I'm like, I was still working on it. Even if I didn't actually like put something on that substrate, I was still thinking about it, working on it. So I revised that one for this show, and when I work on video works, I think about them as like a diacritical too. So I started this video work here, keeping count in 2019, because someone asked me to do a show, and I was like, I'll do a video, and I had never really made a video before, and I had to figure it out before the show, and I realized I really liked making video work. And then I wanted to make another video, but I was like, this one isn't done, so what if this previous one sort of leaks into the next one, and what if I didn't detach them? What if I just like made it clear that these are edits? And so I think, and I published a book previous to that, which was misprinted, so I republished it with annotations of the misprint. Like, so I think there's an element for me of like this element that was talked about before of like thinking publicly and thinking aloud, and having given all these lectures about like certainty and the importance of thinking aloud, and then it happening to me and me being upset about it, and then me being like, damn, you have not internalized this thing that you intellectually understand. And so I think part of this in a spiritual way is for me to sort of get my body and get my spirit in the motion of like, things are not literally not done, and that you have the right, and I would argue the responsibility to keep going back to the scene of presumed certainty, to keep working on the thing, because otherwise what are we doing? Like, we're stagnated. And so I want to be able to like think about the work as like different states of matter, like it's a liquid. I can keep going back to it in a particular way.
How to follow that? I think so. Maybe I should start off by saying that my first creative love language is poetry, and so it's the creative practice that I've had the longest. Collage animation is the thing I've done the shortest. And so, but there's a rhythm that, for me, is represented in this work. And Dr. CBS says something about remixing yourself. And I feel like I'm bringing multiple layers of myself to the work, no matter what the medium that it's being represented in. But I always go back to one of my creative North Stars, and that's Toni K. Bambara, who talked about returning to the paints because she needed a new language to express herself in. And so I think for me, it's always just trying to find the most appropriate or timely language to express an idea in. So the topics in life are so short, they're so finite, but the way that we express it, the moment, the time, I think for me dictates what is happening in a particular piece of work that I put out. And sometimes there was a window of time that I felt an extreme sense of urgency about putting my work out into the world. And I was telling Kameelah that the reason why I also love, and I call it collage animation because I come to it as a collage artist, and also another artist whose work I'm really inspired by, Kelly Gallagher. I believe that is how Kelly describes it. So when I work in collage animation, which is stop motion animation, there is something about, like, my style is more do-it-yourself, the aesthetic, and it allows me to, quite frankly, release all perfectionism and just move on. Also, the idea of even remixing those particular works is less than ideal because it's hundreds of frames. I think even for this, if folks are familiar with animation, it takes so many pictures just to get a short window of time for something that moves. So we're talking this 5 minutes is like, I'm almost up to 1,000 images just to get something that's 5 minutes long. So to go back and try to remix a thing or add something or be like, oh, it's not done, it's just not really practical. So it helps me to take my hands off of it, literally, to move on with something else and hopefully catch it on the next go. Or maybe use sound to try and convey a thing that I just could not bring forth. So I always say especially with collage and animation, for me, it's like you don't know what's gonna happen till you touch the material. There's a lot of happy accidents. A piece of paper could just literally slip out of my hand, and I'll be like, oh, look at that. It moves this way. I'm gonna recreate that and capture it. So I think in different, iterations of the work or what I'm trying to express, I don't know, it's an ongoing process, but I do see, even if it's not detectable to the viewer, there are so many layers to my creative self and process that they're still living in the work. And then the fun part too is, I have what I think it means, but then sometimes even when you see it next to something else, you're like, oh, I didn't even pick up on that thing. Or someone will I love when people also know my work across multiple medium, because they'll be like, oh, Julia, I see this thing here, and it reminds me of this other thing. And of course, it's subconscious to me at that point, so I don't even know that it's happening. So
I love this point about language and a language system, because all of you in some way are creating your own language systems for how to interpret our world under and against the systems that we've been given or circumscribed by, right? And so I wanted to hear Will and Shraddha talk about their actual process in making the prints and the kinds of visual languages and things that you were maybe discovering along the way that you that became kind of crystal clear to you in the process of making, like laying things down and again, like the actual kind of physical process, but also the conceptual things that kind of came to the fore aesthetically that have to do with like linguistics and poetics and semiotics.
Difficult question. So, where do I start? So, I want to start with, the Du Bois pieces, because it also, part of what we were doing was taking a view of that project and being extremely inspired, but we were asking, everything that we made was about answering questions that we had asked of that project for the 21st century. The direct question of like, what does this look like in the 20th century? What are aesthetics? What are if he was dealing with a kind of proto-modernism, what has changed since then? And what types of, mapping tools and images of how we see maps or see graphs and charts and things like this exist in the 21st century in a way that further, one looking at it with his in mind then has to further their vision into the 21st century and say, this is undeniably something that couldn't have been made any time else, and in every single way, every question. So each visualization has that sort of question. So to like answer it properly, almost each one of those things are kind of built out of a necessity of a particular type of question. So which is really different than what I do in my own work, which is, it's one question and I kind of just do iteration. And that was an interesting conversation earlier about AI and the difference between what AI does and what people do. So since that was a goal, we found ourselves right in so many ways of finding opportunities where we could see I guess, typologies of art history, and from modernism to now, histories both in mapping and data visualization and histories and art histories. So that, for like just to give an example, we are in St. Louis and we're doing the family. Not the family tree, the budgets of And so this is consumer, this is really about like what we consume and how much, how we divide up the pie, as a average Black family, or collectively the average Black family. I'm thinking like, immediately I think, because I have some ground in our history, I'm thinking about Warhol and pop culture, and we have the "Thanks for Shopping with Us" bag, which is meaningful in so many ways, and I'm taking one, so just to expand on something, when I think of the plastic shopping bag, in other places around the world outside of the United States, having that plastic bag signifies you bought something. It signifies a certain, entree into like a kind of marketplace, that money. Those bags and here and in all around the world exist in, landfills and, everywhere. There's kind of like this ubiquitous thing. And the idea that in New York City, that in other places we sort of ban them, in the bodegas and in the shopping places, and they somehow like no longer exist, even though low key, like your convenience store still gives me some plastic bags. It's so I was just thinking about, like that's an example of just how you're thinking about like how this sort of humble thing is so much larger and speaks to so many things, and so it has this moment, this kind of like pop art moment, and thinking about how we spend our money. Does that answer your question? Do you want to say anything? No.
Okay, great. I wanted to hear the other artists on the panel also talk about their process. Because as you mentioned, Tahir, you're coding and you created an entire system. Like, I forget how you described it earlier, but it was like, it wasn't just the code. It was like you had to create the system that would understand the language that you wanted to output and like form into this thing rather than the other way around. So I was hoping that you could start talking about your process, and then we could kind of go down the line for the folks who haven't said, but really thinking about the material and conceptual processes that helped you make this work.
Yeah, for the work that's in the show, the material that I use to make the artwork is data. And it's the analysis of Black languages, the analysis specifically of hip hop lyrics from 1979 till today. And me and my team built a system that does a semantic and syntax analysis of over 1 million lyrics. 40 different languages, so there's a time and a place on earth for every utterance in hip hop. And it's an archive, but it's also a subjective archive, because some of those lyrics are transcribed incorrectly. Because, if someone, so we're talking about 50 years, so if someone is, who has time to transcribe a rap lyric, right? So if there's an 18-year-old from Ohio transcribing a rapper's lyric from before they were born out of New York City, there's like subtleties with language and slang that they're not going to get. So the data is wrong. I mean, actually all data is wrong, but the data is wrong. And the moment I decide to do work on a project, the snapshot I take of those data is already outdated, because the creation of these songs and these lyrics and this culture continues. So not only did the work that I did in 2017 needs to be updated, but it needed to be updated a day after I started working on it. So it's an impossible project, and it's an impossible project to quantify like this qualitative culture. But it's also a reflection on all of the data that we share with companies and platforms, and the decisions that they make about us based on these data. Like it's all flawed. So that's sort of another poetic of the work that I do, to show these inconsistencies and frailties and flaws in this science that we really think is real. It's useful. Projections are useful. Data is useful. but we should, there needs to be one of the tenets that we have at the Rap Research Lab, the name of my studio that does this work is data needs memory. So you can have access to data, you can have access to tools, you can make charts, but if you're not intimate with the culture or part of the culture that created that the data was created from, you probably shouldn't be telling stories with that data.
That was great. Yeah, I'm just waiting for the next folks to chime in on process, but I'm like, yeah, we're going to come back to that.
Can I add something?
Go ahead. Drop, pop in.
AI because I want to. I'm not gonna. Yeah. So as just context, I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I've been exposed to the tech bro culture since the very early points in my life, mostly because our small poor town was like the testing ground for a lot of emerging technology. They would come and test it on the little hood kids to be like, does this computer do the thing that you want it to do? And so I had sort of abandoned anything in computing for a long time because of the association. After I learned how to code when I was like 11 or 12, I kind of just sort of left it behind. And in the past couple of years, I've been doing sort of this death work around death dueling, and then also getting into machine learning with regards to these death bots, which are these bots that are developed using a corpus of written information from a person who is deceased. You give it to a company. There's a bunch of companies that do it, and it's very unethical in my opinion. But you basically give over a corpus of someone's written archive to this company. They train it on a language model, and then they, from there, create an avatar that you can talk to. Sometimes they're live faces, but a lot of times they're literally chatbots. And I think that in the previous presentation, when there was a conversation around machine learning and data, I think the thing that came up for me was AI slop and model collapse and the reproduction of fake data also. So when Tahir was saying before around data being wrong, there's a data being wrong, right? And then there's the data being wrong because the person who is transcribing it doesn't have the nuances to make sure that it's being transcribed correctly, or something is considered dirty data or not to be included, but it's actually relevant data, but you just don't get it, so it's dirty data to you, so it's not included. So the data set has now changed, and so I think there's an element for me of thinking about Du Bois in this context of what can and cannot be measured, but what types of questions must we ask now at a time where it's so easy to to create synthetic data, and when we're creating images and creating text and having citations in scientific articles, which happens way too frequently, that are not scientific articles, or data sets that are not data sets. And so I think there is this question around what is real, what's not real. And so I think, Tahir, I think this is part of the reason why I've been so fascinated by your practice, is because I think early on, you had already tapped into that before everyone else sort of caught up to the conversation, which was this is not it's subjective. And I think now people are they're yeah, it's subjective. I'm yeah, he bro said that. He said that. He said that a while back. And so I think I guess, and not to divert the conversation, but I am really curious about questions around fakery and mimicry, and just these questions of what does it mean that you can produce a fake data set, publish it in a scientific paper, and by the time that it's sort of made its way around the world, and now you figure out that it needs to be retracted, right? So there's sort of this leaching of fictional data into the ecosystem that I'm really interested in, and I think it's something that Du Bois does sort of contend with, right? This understanding that the data that was produced about Black folks before his sort of entrance could be considered this sort of fictionalized data that's being circulated. It's a different mechanism, but we're dealing with a similar context, and so I don't think there's a question there. I just think I wanted to say it, so I said it. But yeah, I think I'm really interested in this question of fictional data and sort of the repercussions of that, and not allowing for machine learning to sort of have this presence of neutrality. It's really shitty and it's really dangerous, and it's a great problem because most of us do not have the conceptual skill set to recognize what we're looking at, which is why I like the question from the last panel of do we have the skill set? And I'm most of us don't. A lot of older people, including my parents, will repost things that are clearly AI slop, and I have to tell them that is not a real thing, or that data set, that's not real, just backward search it. It's, okay, rant over, I'm done.
But I wanted to insert, and then I will come back to the question of process, because I think this is really important, because I also was thinking about you when you said wrongness, and I was like, oh, do your data sets ever hallucinate or whatever? I'm not a coder in person, but I'm thinking about fiction and hallucination, and how that works. And also, I was reading something recently, because I do some work on Afrofuturism, and I was in Dakar actually last week in a Pan-African convening in the spirit of Du Bois, but thinking about AI, Black futures, and all this stuff that I'm also going to probably have a question about for all y'all as a closing question before we open up to Q&A. But the point is that during that convening, I was reading about Peter Thiel and the ways that he's using the term ontology as a semiotic kind of like, and I'm just so fascinated because like ontology is also a vexing word within Black study also that we're constantly trying to kind of define or whatever. And it's like, is it just existence? If so, then what about fiction? What about hallucinations? So that's the question, I guess, or kind of more context if we could talk about that.
Yeah. In 2016, we taught the AI how to rap. So, it's the output is really interesting in terms of feeling. It gets it, and this is 2016. That was 10 years ago. So we need to do it again. But Rap Research Lab, we have a whole program that talks about authorship and puts human written songs next to AI written songs, and creates a site for people. Creates a site for people to do a comparison, to have a conversation, talk about some of the implications of AI on our lives. We also have a program that was supposed to happen at the Kennedy Center. I was a social practice fellow at the Kennedy Center. It was a 3-year fellowship, and just at the beginning of the second year, the whole department was erased. But that was some of the work that we were going to do there. We're finding other places to do, like, to break up the work. But one is called Prompt Battle, where we invite. You say you did some in your class, right? No.
I talk a lot, so I don't always remember
Okay.
what I say. But I do prompts. Yes.
Yeah, so Prompt Battle is, calling the world's best prompt engineers, have them on stage, in a competitive format, and then have academics and scholars, like in the interstitial moments, talk about implications of AI, having some workshops tied to it, and some education to just to create this feeling of belongingness, so that people, when they come into tech, they feel like they belong, and then they can learn some of the language and understand some of the meaning, and maybe leave with questions for their local politician, or maybe their grandparents, some answers for their grandparents or parents. So that's some of the work that we're doing.
Do you want to respond?
I don't know. I was thinking about that question earlier too, but more on what is the human sort of component that that can like disrupt the technology, and I think to hear when you said memory, I was like, yeah, that's it. In the arts we don't talk about. I think in AI you talk about replication. You put things. I don't know anything, by the way, about whatever is language, if it's language driven or whatever it is, it's some replication, right? Some combination of replication of the things that has been put in. But the human psyche and memory is like, it's like an ocean of things that we don't even know that we are consciously we're not consciously aware of, that when we talk about not replication, but when we talk about iteration in the arts, you make a thing and you riff off a form. Sometimes we use the wrong language, like riffing is like another kind of type of language that comes out of maybe hip hop or something. But that each iteration goes back through that entire, human process, from memory and experience, right, to just push the needle a little bit further on a form that you have, that you've produced. You're looking at it, right, and optically, and that is going in deep into all this other stuff. And I feel like that disrupts, right? That disrupts. That's why, if you're, whereas maybe an AI thing will make something that looks like something, looks good or looks like a thing, iteration will always be a generative, process with kind of no end. Anyway.
I think that's the solution until on the human side, that quality doesn't matter to us.
Oh, let's talk. See that? I want to.
I went to a party in Fort Greene, a house party in Fort Greene in probably like 2005, right? And the DJ was set up in the parlor room, and he was DJing records and CDs, and I was like, oh, cool. And then playing, people dancing, and then someone had a request, and they were like, oh, I want to hear this song, and the DJ was like, I don't have that song. And the woman said, that's okay, I'll just pull it up on YouTube. And I was like, I'm kind of an audiophile, if it's an MP3, it has to be high quality. I had an old vacuum tube, receiver at my house. And I was like, YouTube? I was like, we can't play a YouTube song at a party. And they were like, whatever. because and they put the song on, people danced to it because they wanted to hear it. The fact that the quality was low, that there were commercials, there were ads, it didn't matter because they wanted to get to, and so it's fine until the quality doesn't matter to us.
Keep on going. Somebody said that, right, earlier, keep going. Because that's my answer to it, because I feel the same way. Could be controversial, but I feel like, especially in terms of representation in art. I mean, we're being trained on Black figurative, portraiture, as what Black art is, and there's so many other conversations about and approaches, but we're almost being trained as a society to think that is this one thing, and it's very hard to see us in so many other ways, hence my attraction to this, Du Bois and these.
Yeah, I have to say something. I'm getting really hot over here because I'm so many things are building under the surface over here, and I was trying, Tiffany, your question about process, iteration, and I'm this may not come out coherent because there's just so much, but Kameelah, you talked about tech bro culture, and I feel the history of tech bro culture is European American mid-century modernism. That's the history of that. It's the history of the Bauhaus is an origin point for abstraction and design thinking. Design thinking is also that lineage of tech bro culture of white guys in Silicon Valley telling us the steps we need to do to heal our community or make the next widget. And so I think for me, a lot of the work that's in this show came out of frustration. It came out of what Will was talking about with feeling alone and disconnected and not seen in your classroom, not seen in the sea of pedagogies, and feeling the only one, and then coming to find you're not, and then the relief of being on a stage like this, and Kameelah, your show last year at Red Cat, Tiffany, Barber, and I saw each other. It was brilliant. That inspired me. To hear you posting over time about your project always inspired me, and whatever those comments on those blogs. I agree, Kameelah. Tahir is so ahead of things. And for me, a watershed moment in the bridge between writing about Du Bois and the pandemic was a workshop that Ramon Tejada and I did in 2019 at Otis College of Art and Design called Throwing the Bauhaus Under the Bus. And it was a workshop where we were playing with ideas of 2D, 3D, 4D, but with the lineages of the students in the room and the lineages of Ramon, who is Dominican immigrant, amazing educator. Me, half Ugandan. We're both queer. We were like kind of like, I don't know, just creating this space where people could bring the kind of shorthand was like mom over modernism, like what is my mother's point of view or grandma's point of view, and I feel like that really like opened up so many things in our conversations and the work and the lineages that are here, and like then kind of realizing like, oh yeah, computing, like Black women computers, like my mom she learned to program COBOL and Fortran when she was studying microbiology, and like, at one point was carrying a program of hers and like bumped into someone and had to like rebuild all the punch cards. And so like, I think that kind of bringing our personal perspectives, and I feel like that has been like such a breakthrough, is to be able to find integration of like these complex things. And like my dad is white too, so and I love me some Joseph Mueller-Brockman, like, so how to like find a way to kind of reconcile these tensions. And I feel like that is the antidote to AI. That is the antidote to replication. It is iteration, human iteration. And I love that dance between the digital and the analog, and I think fucking with stuff. I think how can we fuck with AI, I feel like is the way to kind of take it to another level.
Can I?
Go ahead.
I think I'm gonna do my capitalism rant. I just rant. But I think part of what I am interested in with machine learning and AI is, of course, you'll see all the hot takes like, oh, you're the worst person if you use machine learning, you're the worst person to use AI. And I've participated in these hot takes, I have. And I think part of what I want to say is that capitalism removes all leisure time, all like open free time, where we are now dependent on these tools, right? So I guess, wouldn't it be amazing if I just made my grocery list myself? I don't have time to make the grocery list, but ChatGPT will make the grocery list for me, and now because ChatGPT did it, I can do something else, right? And so I think there's this question for me where it was discussed before around like, do we have the tools? And I think that curiosity is only nurtured when you have leisure time. So you cannot be curious if you do not have leisure time to process information. And I think that we're so overloaded with tasks and things to do that we always are looking for the most efficient route, even if it is not the most creative or productive or generative route, because our goal is to get stuff done. It's not to get stuff done well, it's not to get stuff done in an innovative, it's to get things done. And so I think there, of course, the spirit of capitalism is like completely braided into machine learning and the way that we sort of think about efficiency. And so I think there's like a breaking of capitalism, of course, that needs to happen, but I think literally, I keep thinking about leisure time and playtime as like an anecdote as well. Like we actually have to build in time where you are not doing anything. Like you just literally, like you leave this convening and you just go sit somewhere for 2 hours. You're not on your phone. You're not reading emails. You're not doing, your mind actually gets to drift. And there's an interview that Samuel Delaney and Octavia Butler had in '98 at MIT around hypertext, where he's asking her like, what do you do with computers? And she's like, I don't really deal with hypertext like that. I don't deal with computers. She says she has a primitive hypertext, so that she's in her house, she has books open, she has audio books going on, she's doing all these things, and so the original hypertext is one person using their body. It's a somatic practice of sort of shuttling between different things in a given time because someone had the leisure time to do that. She said, I live alone, I can do this. There's a sense of understanding like how your body allows for a certain thing to happen. And I think that my beef with machine learning, which is a long list of beefs, is in the ways in which it sort of normalizes our relationship to efficiency and the ways that it normalizes our relationship to leisure time and curiosity, that it robs us of the opportunity for curiosity because the answer is right there. Like, so I could go on the internet and research everything I need to do, or I could just tell ChatGPT to do it, and it'll make a quick list for me, and then by the end of those 5 minutes, I have saved 20 hours. But those 20 hours were necessary because I needed to stumble through something. I needed to like get lost. I needed a rabbit hole. And if I don't do those things, you lose. I think that's the humanity, is being lost in something long enough for you to stumble on something that you didn't intend and for you to have an epiphany. Like, you don't get to have epiphanies anymore. You don't get to have surprises. You don't get to, like, I'm hot. I just feel like I think that there, as an educator, I think a lot about like how sad it is to be a young person now, it's always been sad, but to be a young person now and to not really have those like moments where you couldn't access information, so you had to like fight to get it. Like, I want to know the answer to a question. The internet cannot provide it for me because not everyone has a computer in their home. So I may have to go ask a bunch of people. I may have to go to a library. I may just have to like wade in the unknowing for a couple of days until I get somewhere, but everything is so immediate that you literally you don't get to enjoy that like spiritual process of like confusion and epiphany. Like epiphany, I think, is such an important part of knowledge production, and we don't get to do that anymore because we gotta get it done. We gotta. I'm still hot, but I'm gonna stop. But I'm still hot.
Can I add something? Okay. So I think in conversations around AI and technology, and I'm going back to recently reading Dr. Joshua Meyer's book of Black Study, and the Black thinkers that he's sitting with in that text, who are literally questioning the foundation of this idea of a perfect science. And so I think that's, like, as I'm hearing Tahir and Kameelah talk, just like certain words were just coming up for me, and thinking about, like, how is, like, being a descendant of enslaved Black people, right, who were kidnapped and trafficked, and thinking about how our ancestors, and hell, even now, still like our bodies as sites of experimentation, and that being a form of technology. And thinking about how now even, and Kameelah, you said, you know, like they would come to the poor hood kids and basically try out this technology on them. And I'm thinking, like, also around the ideas of, like, how tech is killing us, but then also at the same time, now this goes more to, like, police violence, but thinking about, like, this concept of, like, no human being involved. And even when we talk about AI, like, oh, how do we put the human back in that? But the thing that is, and even the Black body as a machine, when we talk about hyperproductivity and the space for curiosity, and I will say that I do resist or push back against the binary of, like, only certain people get to have time and leisure, or people, like, or I'm not curious, or I'm not being creative. It just may not be in the same manner or at the same volume that people who have exceptional leisure time might have. But I do push back on that a little bit. But also how we so readily adapt all of this or interested in it because of the idea of being left behind. And so, like, even when I see, you know, people are like, oh, AI ain't going nowhere, so y'all better get on it because we're gonna be left behind. And it intrigues me because I always think about, especially as a Black woman, just thinking about how innovative and how curious and how connected our communities are to creating things out of straight necessity. And so folks who don't have the same range and depth or creating, first of all, they're creating problems and then selling us a solution. And then the solution is usually some shit that don't really work. But we're just like, it's like being somewhere and eating some bland ass food and you're like, ooh, this is so good. And you're like, is everybody looking around like, is this good, right? So people, you know, making the flyers with those weird faces, and it was the strange hands, and then people like fabricating things and saying like, oh, but I use AI to generate this thing, but you already conceived it. Like you already had the idea. And so I think about, like, I'm also a fiction writer. And so I'm not I've always felt like I'm a more late adapter when it comes to like any sort of technology. And when people are like, "Oh, just download," I was just at like 3 conferences in the last month, and everybody's using this conference app, and they're like, "Oh, download the app." I was at the registration desk, and they were like, "Oh, but if you download the app, then you can get updates in real time." And I'm thinking, what updates do y'all have? There's not, the hotel rooms are already solidified. Like, I was like, do I have to? And the lady kind of looked at me. She was low-key offended that I asked that I need to download this app. It's like, ma'am, but it's that. We're just doing things because somebody said you should do it and put it on your phone and use it. And it's like, but at what, for what, right? So, but I think, oh my God, I had a point, child, and I just got caught up. I wanted to say one final thing about using technology, adapting solutions. I don't know. I think I lost my point, but I made points.
You definitely made points.
Amazing.
And maybe
That's
we'll,
funny facts.
Hopefully that's enough.
maybe we'll come back to the points. And then Shraddha, you can respond, and then we'll open it out to questions.
I think related to both what Kameelah and Julia was just saying, I think another human element that's missing in data and in AI and technology is the ability to not know or to know what you don't know. I feel like just because data is so ubiquitous, it pretends to know more and more, but that's not necessarily true. Data is still imperfect, it's still incomplete, and it's still subjective, and I think that's something very important to keep in mind.
Great. Questions from the audience? Yes, in the front row. I think do we have a mic that's coming around, or we can pass one of these? Yeah, because we have a lot of mics up here.
Thank you.
I'm heated. That was so much. I'm taking a class right now at Cooper called Black Secret Tech. And, right. They added it to the syllabus so late, but I'm thinking a lot about constitutive science or constitutive data versus contextual data, and how data without context is to a lion without a zebra and a watering hole and the forest, and without all of these things, to keep it alive and to keep it whatever the opposite of to keep it true as true as it could be in an ever-evolving state. Without all of these elements, it's decrepit, it's mangy, and the idea of data without life being breathed into it constantly as just an archive of expiring things is really, really pressing right now. And I guess to kind of bring it to something wider, Kameelah and I were talking about this earlier, the stupid thing about what's the value of art. When photography when photography was emerging, abstract expressionism and painting as a whole has this weird existential crisis, and then you have so many different scholars from the States, Black scholars in the States, going to Europe and then trying to find the answer to this, and then being like, well, what is its value for Black people? And then it going through this weird matrix of systems and epistemes and etc. I'm thinking right now about how it pertains to relationships, and a question that was reframed for me literally today was, what's your relationship to it? And so I guess the relationship that one has to art and the relationship that one has with others, and then lending that to how you want to cultivate a relationship with AI, Aisha, whatever you want to call her. Whatever you want to, however you want to find the value in that. how do we start to find the value in it? And, at a time of like urgency and immediacy and the now, and at the same time, like mourning the loss of a better future, what can we do right now?
I'll just say something really quickly. I think part of what we can do right now is to be candid. I think to tell the truth, to help push back on the lack of context when information is wrong. And the thing I was going to say, I'm a fiction writer. My significant other had, I wrote this short story, and he came across this app that basically repeats information to you in like a form of a podcast. So it's like two voices talking back and forth, and he put my short story in there. And he did it twice, but both times I felt like the context was wrong. So the wild thing was these voices, right? They're doing that typical podcast voice that always makes it sound like everything they're saying makes sense, and that it's right. And so it was like, oh, okay. But then they were absolutely drawing the wrong parallel between the information in the story. And so I think that one of the things that we can mostly do is keep talking about the importance of context. Me and Kameelah were also talking about just how quickly we want people to get to their points. Like, we don't want things to take a little bit of time. So I think even in our relationships with each other, our connections with each other, we can make space for the patience to let people work through their ideas. And also loving correction, right? When something is not correct, how do we say that to each other? How do we reframe? How do we offer additional readings? How do we do that and then make space and check in on each other? It's like, what's our investment in each other's intellectual development? That doesn't feel like slam dunking, because I think even when we do that to each other, people feel like they're being left behind. So they're trying to like, oh, girl, I ain't gotta read 90 books. I'll just ask ChatGPT. And people wouldn't, I think, feel that hurriedness if they felt like it would be okay for me to also be wrong. So that's what I would say.
I can like respond to, because I feel like one of the things I wanted to talk about was like grief work, and how, Kameelah, you were talking about being a doula, and I feel like this, the wall drawing that I made that has a lot of like family portraiture. My mom passed a year ago this past August, and like a lot of the work is about having a space to grieve, and I feel like what I was hearing from you is like a grief with like the current situation. I feel like that is one of the powers of art, is that it does allow space for grief work, and it allows space for resistance. It allows space for like the fly in the machine. You were talking about photography, and I realized we were like citing a lot of people, but I think one person that I wanted to cite was Sean Michelle Smith's book, Photography Along the Color Line, because part of the exhibition that Du Bois and his collaborators created, there were a number of photographs of middle-class Black people that were in that exhibition, and I think it's like a really powerful, and since photography is like a big part of like the things that I've made, and the history of photos, her text is really rich, and it like taps back to the color line question and representation, and also like what's missing, and like who's training these data sets and who's not. So I feel like that could maybe be a useful tool for you, and I feel like that is something that I sit with, is that like that grief, and also knowing like if I do use AI, like this is displacing like people, you know, like where the data center is going, and like how that's also like connected to this history of red line, and I think it's okay to be in grief around how things are working and to still keep going.
And to add to what you're saying, Silas, resisting means, opting out of the app, opting out of the facial recognition at the airport, where like my ID is right here. Right. Like, you have eyes. Right. This is my face. This is my ID. And these, it might not amount to much, but for me, like, as someone that creates technology, like the inconvenience, the steps I have to go through to get, to pay for things, because I don't have anything on my phone. Part of it is also, it's an experiment to see how much I can inconvenience myself, how much I can lag behind where everything else is going. This is someone who makes this stuff, right? And then also, everything is expiring. Like these institutions, like, the Library of Congress, the idea of the institution is this permanent stone structure with these objects in it. But when you go through the shelves and look at the objects, like the paper is disintegrating. So everything is expiring. Even these ideas of these public monuments that house all of this work and objects, like it's all expiring.
Quick. Thanks, Victoria. Victoria was my old Cooper student, so it's really nice that you're here. I keep thinking about this Lucio Clifton poem that I'm going to misquote, but she's talking about saviors, and I think I've had a very tense relationship with the idea of having a savior, in the sense of there's one person or a solution that is just waiting there for us to arrive at, and then that's going to fix everything. And I think that's how we've treated art in a lot of ways, of you make the thing and that thing is going to do the thing, and then after it does the thing, it's going to do another thing. And I always make this controversial statement, and then people are sometimes annoyed with me, and I don't care, which is that I don't think art doesn't do anything. Let me explain. Art doesn't do anything. Our relationship that we develop with the thing that we're looking at, the community that's built around it, is the thing that does something. We made it, and it's great that we made it, but something else has to happen, right? So even this gathering of people here is another thing that happens. If Tiffany had just been great, I had a show, that was amazing, and we didn't actually talk, then we haven't done our actual responsibility. And so I think part of what I'm trying to say is a method or a practice is sort of thinking about not so much interdisciplinary practice. I got a beef with a lot of stuff. Interdisciplinary practice is one of those phrases that it feels vague in a unnecessary way, but I think that this idea that we cannot rely on art alone to do it, that we must bring in other sort of methods and systems and structures to do it, that we cannot treat art as a savior. Art practice is in the art market, and we understand what's happening. And so I think there's an element for me of as you're making your art, what else are you doing? And as you're writing your book, what else are you doing? And as you were going to church, what else are you doing? How do you build an ecosystem of practice instead of having one keystone species that's expected to do everything, which we keep having art do everything. Art can't do everything because we got to do something. We actually have to do something. And so I think for me, and you've brought this up a lot in our class in the past, which is trying to figure out our relationship to why we're doing things, not just doing things because it gives us prestige or we get to sit on a stage, but we're doing something because we actually understand that in doing that particular thing, something is moving. Something is moving, and it may be very, very slow, but something's happening. Something's moving, I hope. I mean, I get less optimistic day by day, but I'm gonna still rock it out. I'm gonna grieve, but also I think that there has to be some element of non-passivity. I think that art has become very passive, that we've been make the artwork, get the grant, put up the show, and then we all go home. And we say, great, I made the thing, and I feel really good about myself. And then it's done. Yeah.
I'm just going to add one thing. I think just one thing, which is the question of, does the methodology and the process reflect what I'm trying to understand, learn from what I'm doing, So if you are going to go to ChatGPT or something like that, and we're talking about efficiency and time, is the methodology that you're choosing, right, is in the terms of capitalism and efficiency and time, does that have anything to do with what you're trying to get to? And if it doesn't, I think to Tahir's point, he put it really simple, opt out, you can not, do, you can opt out. Yeah. You can say no.
Andre.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your ideas on this panel. I'm Andre Zachary. I have two questions, and the first was for the entire panel, and it was based off of Tahir. You were speaking about context, which was just iterated earlier, just in this question before me. And I was thinking back on a project that I just premiered, and in the research phase, I was able to go to the Chicago Historical Society and read and literally sift through the Chicago Police Department records on Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party and their fervent, of course, surveillance and observations of Chairman Fred and the Panthers, and really the entire that era of Black Chicago. Something I realized, they literally they had a section for James Baldwin. They had a section for Margaret Burroughs. It was quite evil in every way, but it also then brought to mind this notion of, right, there's this 2D record of the state, right, that it was important for me to look at and be like, okay, this is literally what the state is seeing, and the state has archived for me and others to apparently get a factual view on what has happened, which then I'm realizing, but like, no, I know this, my relatives are already there. So what happened? How were they conceiving it? And then speaking with them, it was interesting because some relatives were like, oh, we thought the Black Panthers were just like the Vice Lords and the Blackstone Red. I'm like, that's interesting. And then I had some other relatives who were like, oh no, I was helping drive people to the free breakfasts and free health clinics. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And so then community members speaking about, most we did showings of the performance. And of like, yeah, after Chairman Fred was killed, we marched out of high school and did a protest. And it was like, okay, wow. And so I'm just wondering now, is there a way that context almost shouldn't live in AI? As a programmer and coder myself, it's something that I almost never rely on AI to build. Or when I'm building a system. And then this is a question then for Silas, because then you mentioned earlier about kind of like this notion of reconciliation, and I'm actually fervently against any form of reconciliation. In that, like, I'm actually really good with this notion of fissure and this notion of friction, and I think like I personally feel like there's a laziness in reconciliation. That gets really I shouldn't say that word. But laziness is a word that has come up already, and I feel with the notion of reconciliation it gets a little, that's lazy for me, and I'm just like, is there anything else we can consider in that venture? And I'll leave it at that. Excuse me, last one, and this is for Shraddha. And I'm thinking about your work as a urban planner, and I'm thinking about then the work of that June Jordan and Buckminster Fuller did in their conceptualizations of Harlem, for reimagining Harlem, and could that be a direction that we allude to or navigate towards as a new form of because they were using data. And they were also speculating, right? And so I'm just like, how is that for me is something I'm always like, no, I'm navigating towards that. So those are 3 questions actually, not 2.
Sorry, can I just like respond to your question to me? Reconciliation of what? Sorry, there were so many things I said that I'm not exactly sure what I was like offering as a reconciliation with. Could you just? Oh, sorry, the mic got. Can you?
Was it about integration? Is that the word that you were thinking about when it was like?
Sorry.
Or was it about grief work? No. Reconciliation. It was not about grief work. Okay.
No, it was before that. You were speaking about reconciliation in terms of between like digital and analog.
Oh.
So like, integration I think is the word that you use, but reconciliation is maybe how, but yeah.
I don't know if there's reconciliation between those things. I just know there's more oscillation for me in the way that I work, so maybe I spoke incorrectly. But like, I don't know, it was really interesting to see, like, it's been powerful to get to know Julia and your work, and like that the video is really staying with me. But there's a lot of parts of my process that are very labor intensive that are not in a digital space. And like I cut and collage and manipulate, and like for me the digital space is not about saving time. In fact, I feel like I lose a lot of time in the digital space. Like it fucking can be very draining. But for me it's like part of, I think, what I'm grappling with as a maker is like reconciling between digital and analog spaces. And for me, it's like, it's helpful to move through both. And I think maybe it's because I'm a geriatric millennial and kind of like crossing between kind of the end of Gen X, I'm really a Y, and like millennials and Gen Z, where I'm like, I learned to set type in the type shop, but also I was learning like Illustrator, Quark, and then like the first version of InDesign. So kind of there's like a bridge there. And so for me, it's helpful to kind of process back and forth. And I don't know if I answered that question or I don't know. Let's have like a drink like later or like talk about it deeper. But I'll let other people answer the context question. And I think Shraddha, you had a question as well, pointed at you, or not pointed at you, offered to you.
I don't think I'm familiar with the June Jordan Buckminster Fuller vision of Harlem, but I think generally I'm very skeptical of someone else imagining what a whole community should be. You know, I think a community is participative, it's collaborative, it's built by the people who live there. So I don't think someone else can imagine that for you.
And for my question, it's an interesting question, especially because a lot of us have been taught that representation matters. Yeah. You want to be counted, fill out the census, be at the table, but also being opaque is a form of protection. Being hard to quantify is a form of protection. Not being counted, being difficult, and not being included in the data set is a form of protection, but you might not get smooth roads in your neighborhood. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I love this conversation about reconciliation and difficulty, because I just wrote an entire book about it in terms of art history on Black women's art practices in the 21st century. So go ahead and pick that up. It's called Undesirability and Her Sisters. But I also wanted to give a quick shout out to the team at Print Center who also helped make this happen here at Cooper Union in collaboration with Cooper Union. Jen Bradovich, Alex Santana, Judy Hecker. And I know we have to end right now, but Whitney Battle-Baptiste also has a question, and so I want to honor her being in the room because she's been in the room with us all day, conceptually and physically, but we'll do a quick little 1-2, and then we'll wrap it up.
It's not really a question. I know people just comment. I just want to say thank you. It's like so good to see that this book is still alive. And like when Britt and I got together to do this, it was because it was selfish, I feel like, and it was because we wanted to see all of this laid out. And then with Mabel, who's gone, Mabel's contribution and Aldrich and Silas's captions were more than captions. They really brought all of this to life. And it's just like, because Du Bois said, whatever I did my best, and the rest is up to you all. So we're still doing it. And especially in a moment where anti-intellectualism and all these kinds of things, it doesn't matter because we're still creating. So thank you. I just wanted to say, my heart is so full right now. Thank you.
And then this person has been waiting for a long time, but the title of the book also for everybody is Visualizing Black America, and there are copies on sale at the Print Center in the shop, so please get your copy when you go and see the exhibition if you haven't already.
First of all, wow. Silas mentioned how many ideas were coming through and stuff like that. It's hard to keep up. A 4-hour symposium on a 4 millennia idea. So when I walk through the halls of like the Met Museum, I notice the artwork, and I'm a designer, artisan, and I look at the details, and I look at the beautiful design work, And then I look at the dates, 1100, 1400, 1600, and I realize that there's nothing new under the sun. It's all repetitive, but the words that come in terms of AI, my take on AI is just I look up the word artificial in the dictionary, and I apply it to the next word. Artificial leather, fake leather. Artificial sugar, fake sugar. Artificial intelligence, fake intelligence, not real intelligence. What I look for is more, it's a question of artificial art versus authentic art. And words like synergy, and words like, well, anyway, so the point is that the whole idea of doing this research and doing this, if you're an artist, it's hard to be an artist these days because there's so much information coming in. People talked about leisure time. I read a book once called Every Tool is a Hammer. And so I guess it's not a question, but how does the realization that we're really just repeating the beautiful work of millennia ago, they had less technical tools, but they produced beautiful work.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have a response to that? Oh yes, Julia, go ahead.
Well, because I want to address that, but I'm like picking up over what Tahir said, like, oh, opacity and you don't check the box on the form, but you don't have smooth roads, right? And so it's funny because it makes me think about the concept of being left behind, because I'm like, oh, we already don't have smooth roads in my neighborhood, right? We checked all the boxes. So this false equivalent of like, oh, you're going to end up somewhere better if you give up all your thinking and abilities. And so when we talk about creating things, when you recognize that, when you're exposed to it, I think it also reduces this idea of being a singular, exceptional talent, because you're like, oh, somebody before they were even keeping track of dates, already made this thing, right? So then in that way, we can just enter the conversation as opposed to having being the singular subject matter expert who now gets paid to pretend that I only know this thing and nobody else in the world has ever done this. So for me, that's how I think I've been trying to resist it. Just like y'all talk about citational practices and shared authorship and recognizing that I'm just entering in footsteps that have already been routinely stepped in, and how do I travel in that way? So that's how I've been thinking about it, because I think also, I'm sorry, more things just keep coming, about how technology, you said, like, you feel like it actually takes up a lot of your time. And Kameelah and I were talking about this because I think it also makes us hyper dependent on this idea that something can be perfect, right? And so you just keep working at it. And I think about back in the day, people who wrote books, that was it. Revision is important, but you weren't going to do 1,000 drafts on paper, right? So that's how I resist. Like, I don't have to have the singular expert idea.
Can I say one thing about repetition? I see you, Jen, and I love you, and I see you, and I respect you so
We got to let
deeply.
this tech team go. Kameelah, you get the last word.
Okay.
And then we all have to go out for drinks to
Okay,
keep it going.
So the thing about, I think it's always important to have baselines for terms, and when it comes to repetition, I think we've been doing the same thing over and over. And I think it was Nikki Finney, maybe it was someone else, but she talked about repetition being holy.
Nikki Finney?
Yes, it was, yes. Repetition is holy, right? And so I think, I'm thinking about Tahir, I'm thinking about vinyl too, because my best friend is a musician and he refuses to play his vinyl. Because as we've already confirmed, he says, the first time that you play your vinyl and that needle goes on that vinyl, the next time you play it is not the same. it's not the same because the grooves have now been deepened, right? And so I think that when we think about repetition, I don't think that we're doing the same thing. We may be crossing the same path, but like literally the weight of our body, the weight of whatever, is implanting different types of impressions, right? So we may be encountering the same ground, but it's not the same ground in the sense that like dirt has been disturbed in some capacity. And so I think that for me, like repetition is important because I think you keep returning again to certainty. Like I'm gonna hit the same spot again, and then you're a different person at that same spot. You're gonna hit that same spot again, and something has been disturbed. And so I think part of me is like, I don't actually think the things in the Met are I mean, they're stolen, but I don't think the things in the Met are things that we now look at and they're like, well, we've already seen that. I don't think. I actually do deeply believe that a lot of the stuff that we're seeing from the people on the stage, from the people who are producing things, are very different. And I think that we learn from what we have seen, but I think that there is iteration, there is riffing, there is this recognition that we may have to touch the past, but we do get to touch the past and like Walter Benjamin translation, go off on a tangent. I think there's a tangency less so than a repetition. But I may also be misunderstanding your definition of repetition, but I think about tangency.
Thank you again for coming and staying with us all this time. I hope you have a wonderful evening.